Hey, Arash, welcome back to SportsCage, and we got a ton to talk about, and you wonder where to start. I guess Mitch Marner almost $100 million, Arash, for an outstanding superstar in the NHL regular season, and pretty mediocre player in the playoffs gets almost 100 million. How do you think that's going to work in Vegas, and how are the Leafs going to do without him?
I think it's one of the most fascinating, kind of turnabouts that here you have Mitch Marner, who is from these parts, who wore number 93 in junior in London because his father's favorite player was Doug Gilmour with the Leafs,
Yeah.
who had the city in the palm of his hands, a market that just wanted to embrace him so much that Marner talked about wanting to win here for so long. And it
Mhm.
goes from that to somehow this whole thing became spoiled over the last 2, 3 years to the point where it became very evident that Mitch Marner was not going to re-sign with the Maple Leafs, that Mitch Marner did not want to stay in the city where he met his wife and had a child and grew up in, and wants to be 5 hours away in the desert of Las Vegas. That was his destination from the jump. And I think if we're being real with one another, there was probably some tampering going on along the way for Marner to end up there. And he goes from one of the most hockey mad markets, one of the most sports mad markets, to a place where, there's going to be very little pressure, very little kind of quote unquote negative attention there with the Golden Knights. I find, this is a guy who easily could have had a statue, could have had his jersey retired, could have had all those things if he stayed here in Toronto, but orchestrated his exit by doing what he's done over the last couple of years.
Vegas is an interesting team because they go for these veterans, good players, obviously. Just getting the news that Peter Angelo's likely done with his career there because of some bad hips, but I don't see them ever developing younger players and drafting and getting draft picks and drafting well. And it's all of these good old veterans. I don't know if you win a Stanley Cup that way, or do you disagree with that?
Well, they have. I guess that's the point here. That's the rub, is that Vegas has. So it's an interesting quote unquote model, Don, that they've gone with, is that they have an owner who is willing to spend cash way over the cap
Mm.
and put these vets on long-term injured reserve and then add them either towards the end of the regular season or when the playoffs start, when the cap doesn't hit. Look, good
Mhm.
ownership wins. And maybe you don't necessarily need to draft and develop. Look, I think if you're a market like Vegas, you cannot have a rebuild and expect people to be patient and continue to come to the arena. There are a lot of other options for your entertainment dollar in Las Vegas. So, I just don't, I think the owner realizes this is the way we got to go about it.
Yeah, I guess you're right. They have done it. I just don't know how sustainable it's going to be. But is it a point now, without a few younger players that you're developing yourself, is what I mean, is what Montreal is trying to do. But
Right.
is it becoming a league, a rash, where the richest owners are going to just win? Maybe they don't have to pay tax in their state, or they can buy out contracts. Like at some point, Brad Marchand, he's got a contract at the age of 43. He's not going to finish that. They're going to buy him out. Is it going to be the richer owners going to win? Because that's going to stink like Major League Baseball does in that respect.
Maybe, except on the richest owners, I would dare suggest, are here in Toronto. And how's that worked out for them?
And that just
Um,
changed today, or they Rogers just
sure.
got it today.
Another top owner, the New York Rangers. They haven't won since 1994. Look, I get what Florida's doing. I think then what happens with owners is once you win, There's nothing like it. It's a disease. It is addictive. Once you taste it, once you lift that trophy over your head, you just want more and more of it. And it doesn't matter which one it is. You know, the Argos lifting Grey Cup trophies, Larry Tannenbaum, who for now is still one of the owners of MLSE, he liked that a lot. He liked when Toronto FC lifted it. They all liked it when the Raptors did.
Oh, yeah.
So, once you win, the owners are like, all right, let's keep this thing going. Unless you're the Florida Marlins, but that's a different story for a different day.
Well, Keith Pelly's the big man in Toronto sports now, of course, is the head honcho of Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, and you wonder when the Blue Jay umbrella will come under even Keith Pelly at some point. I don't know if it will or not, but it's interesting because he's been getting rid of presidents lately and not replacing them except for Masai Ujiri. And he said it's because they're going to bring in a president. The NBA is more complex than the other sports. What did you think of that comment?
Well, I think I told Barney months ago to expect when Bill Manning was sent out and Manning was overseeing as president TFC and the Argos, I said, this is just the beginning. And then came Brendan Shanahan and then came Masai Ujiri. I don't know, Don. It wouldn't shock me if Bobby Webster, who now just got a contract extension as GM, they'll say, yeah, we did a search, but Bobby knows our organization. He knows the market. He knows the league. He's well respected. He works in a big office. It wouldn't surprise me if that happens. Where it's gotten now interesting is the full reset is underway with new ownership. Rogers officially today became the majority owner of MLSE. So what does that mean? Well, it means that there is no longer a board of directors, like the Riders have.
Yep.
It is one owner, one central owner in Ed Rogers. And immediately you're seeing, it began with the presidents going out. Then Toronto FC, their two top paid players, these two Italian guys, they got bought out. It's an entirely different deal now. And I just think you're going to see real influence from ownership on these teams, for better, for worse, good, bad, indifferent. It's going to be a different way of going about business. And it's going to be really interesting to watch how much they're going to spend on the soccer side, how much they're going to spend on the football side, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, Keith Pelly, according to what he said when he asked Masai Ujiri, was that they had decided that Masai Ujiri would do the draft, and then at that point he was going to he got fired, basically. He was going to be leaving after the draft. So you would think by that, Arash, that he was calling the shots at the draft, which was such an absurd draft for the Raptors, not picking a 5 or a center, whatever you want to call the big men. We see Jakob Poeltl getting a new deal just, I think, yesterday, but he's got nobody to back him up, and they couldn't win a basketball game last year whenever Jakob was injured, and they don't pick a center. Instead, they pick the exact same type of athlete that they've already got. And I thought that is the most muddled up, bizarre draft, and they could have had a couple of the big guys from Duke and Maryland that were right there for them. And in fact, I think the Duke guy went next. How do you explain that goofy draft the Raptors had? Because they didn't draft for what they needed.
It feels like for a while, Don, that the Raptors have been on the long road to nowhere. And then Ujiri and company were really trying to push the rebuild narrative and the patience narrative and stick with us. And then they short-circuited last year with the trade, bringing in Brandon Ingram, et cetera. So now they're not at the point where they could fully tank. They didn't get any luck in the lottery on top of that. This was an opportunity for a generational player. And so now, look, you have to give the caveat, you have to give the boilerplate. The Raptors won a championship in 2019. First time ever. It was a major event. It united Canadians. It gave people belief and all those things. And it's amazing what happened. I covered the finals. I covered the parade. It was an incredible time. Don, that was before the pandemic. Like we live in a professional sports world of what have you done for me lately? Well, what have the Raptors done though since? In 20, in 21, in 22, in 23, in 24, in 25.
Yeah, that's
Like
right.
6 years and one playoff series win. They're not even getting back to the postseason anymore. And there was just this hanging on. Well, Masai said we're going to win again here, so we got to believe him because it happened once before a long time ago. I just I haven't understood the draft strategies, plural, not just this year, but over the last few years, and it's kind of been par for the course for a little while now.
Well, and the way they left, or Masai left the roster in terms of free agency, trying to get a center. I just saw Ayton signed a deal just today, leaving Portland, but
With the Lakers.
to the Lakers, exactly. But, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, Webster had no money anyway to try to get a center in free agency because they don't have any money right now with what their salary structure is right now. I want to go back to Webster, though. Apparently, Webster, Spicy P, of course, Siakam, Pascal Siakam, they didn't want to give him the max contract, or I should say, Ujiri didn't want to give him the max contract, but Webster was apparently of another thought, and of course Siakam goes to the NBA Finals. So, is he going to be quite different if he stays in power for any length of time? Is Webster going to be quite different? Do you think that Masai Ujiri?
I think there'll be some differences and changes and different philosophies. Look, everybody's got a boss, no matter what your job is. Whoever's listening or watching the stream right now, how many times have you thought to yourself, man, I see what's happening here. If I were in charge, I may go about it this way. Wait till they give me the keys to this business, to this organization, to this farm, to this building, to whatever it is we're doing here. I think Bobby Webster's in the same spot. Here's somebody who came up in the league office. Here's somebody who's been the number two behind Masai for a while. He's seen what's worked. He's seen what hasn't worked. He probably has his own philosophies on how to go about it and just hasn't had final say. Now he holds the keys. So I think you're going to see a little bit of what you saw before. I think you're going to see a little bit of brand new philosophies and a little bit of put both in the blender and see where it takes you.
Yeah.
But for a long time, Bobby Webster's said, you know, I wonder what happens if I'm in charge. Well, now he's in charge, Don.
Yep. Looks like it. It looks like Keith Pelly's making nice comments, and he got an extension of his contract. Now let's get to the CFL. I really didn't expect Brady Oliveira to be back as soon as he is after that shoulder injury, I believe the first game of the season, but he's playing tomorrow night in Calgary. So what do you think of all that sort of thing? Because the Bombers are doing pretty well without him.
Yeah, and I think this is showing a lot of respect for Brady Oliveira because you know Oliveira wants to play. And the fact that he was able to practice all week, suggests that there's a green light. I'm assuming, I don't know what his pitch count is going to be, but I don't expect him to get the full load of carries. Will they spell him off for series? Will they have specific packages for the young Canadian who's been starting in his spot? Probably. But look, Brady Oliveira is, along with Zach Collaros, the face of this franchise. And so, I'm all for sit the guy. He's got nothing to prove. Give him another week, et cetera, protect the player from themselves. But if he thinks he can go, and maybe this is a way of, giving him 50, 60, 65% of the reps as a kind of ramp up. Maybe that's kind of the philosophy going into this Calgary game. But the Bombers have gotten healthy across the board. And I just think that this is kind of tailor-made for a Winnipeg win tomorrow night.
Yeah, well, here in Saskatchewan, we keep waiting and waiting and waiting, Arash, for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to be lousy. They lose 8 players to the Hamilton Tiger Cats over the off season, and you think, finally, and their quarterback's getting older. But there's something magic in that city with that football team, and it seems to center around their head coach, Mike O'Shea, does it not?
I think O'Shea's a big part of it. I think Caleros is a big part of it. He's somebody who is a very even-keeled demeanor, but he can turn it up when it matters. I think Willie Jefferson brings the fire and brimstone. I think you have a veteran offensive line. I think that matters a lot, and you have a couple of Hall of Famers up front. It's a big part of it. There's been some change, but there's been a lot of continuity there, Don. And in a business of a lot of change, the fact that you can have kind of, pillars on your team, the Neufeld, the Stanley Bryants, the Nick Dembskis, the Zach Colaroses, it's Olivero taking the torch from Andrew Harris, on and on we can go. I think that's a big part of roster construction and culture building that's been able to withstand all of this and I think this is important too, Don, withstand a number, it's now plural, of Grey Cup losses. It's easy for things to kind of spin away, and they haven't. And I think there's something to be said for that.
That is an outstanding point. That's right. They just keep rolling. Now, for me, I haven't been overly enthused in the last number of years about Saskatchewan's chances against Winnipeg, particularly in Winnipeg. Now, the Rough Riders have a lot of injuries at the moment, but this year, my question is this the year, though, that Saskatchewan can knock Winnipeg off? What do you think?
No, I don't know. It's July 2nd, Don.
Yeah, I know.
November is 4 months away. There's so much that can happen over the course of a football season. What does the roster look like then compared to the roster now with injuries and the rest? I always say it's not the best team that wins. It's often the healthiest.
That's right.
And there in Winnipeg, they probably wonder what happens if Zach Collaros doesn't cut open his finger last year in the Grey Cup.
Exactly.
So it's so hard to kind of forecast what'll happen. But I will tell you this. Something tells me that the Riders are going to win Labor Day and the Bombers are going to win the Banjo Bowl. Because it just seems there's something karmic out there when it comes to those 2 weeks.
It is. And then they play a third time as well later in the season. Now, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, they looked pretty good, I thought, last week. Do you see this team maybe building a little momentum after what I thought was a pretty good victory?
It was a good win. It was a needed win. You get a rookie in there, a middle linebacker with a pick six and making plays for you. Bo looked comfortable for the first time in a while. But I think we just have to pause a little bit on this Ticats thing because we saw why McLeod Bethel Thompson was expendable this offseason. That's not the same Alouettes team. It's one thing if Davis Alexander's in there. It's a different thing if he's not. Now, what I liked about Hamilton was their foot was on the accelerator. They had the gadget play with the fake punt. They were able to take advantage of the turnovers. They executed at a high level, which they hadn't done in a while. We'll see against Toronto. Look, there's still no Chad Kelly again. It's a short week for the Argos, but I obviously was needed for the Tiger Cats. I'm just not sure how much, Don, we actually learned about Hamilton. I think we learned more about Montreal and how important Davis Alexander is to that football team.
Is Davis Alexander, is he the new face, if you will, of the CFL?
He's the new hope. He's the next young hope that this league has. And I want to be careful the way I say this. I think we're still waiting to see what Nathan Rourke can be. Because what Nathan Rourke was pre-NFL and what Nathan Rourke has shown to be post-NFL almost feel like two different people, two different players. We don't know what Drew Brown is in Ottawa. He hasn't been able to stay healthy. That offensive line's a mess, et cetera, et cetera. Look, I think if you're looking at one young, quote-unquote, face, one young quarterback, one young hope, to me it is, I agree with you. It's Davis Alexander. I put him ahead of Trey Ford. I put him ahead of... Right now, I even put him ahead of Rourke just because Rourke hasn't been able to stay healthy enough to show over a sustained period of time since coming back from the NFL what he can be and what he is.
Well, I mean, is there hope for Trey Ford? I mean, he's an outstanding athlete, but when he has to stay in the pocket, when he's back reading a defense, it looks like hesitation to me. But do you think that he's still going to be the man to lead the Elks, or what's your take on him at this exact moment of time?
So I think we need to remember that Trey Ford is in a situation where the Elks were so bad last year that they changed their general manager, they changed their head coach, and they basically rehauled their roster.
Mm-hmm.
It's not Folgers. It's not instant coffee. You can't snap your fingers and make things happen. I don't know how good the Elks are overall.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see more imagination in that entire offense. I want to see a little more than the traditional things that we've been seeing from the Elks. More pre-snap motion, get some guys into space, et cetera, et cetera. I think that would help Edmonton a lot. But I just don't know if this is a full referendum on Trey Ford. Like
Yeah.
if Jake Mayer, if Vernon Adams, if Bo, if they were all starting for Edmonton this week, what would that offense be? So, yeah, some of it is on Ford. There's no question, etc. But also, let's remember what the Edmonton Elks are and what they've been and why they're in this spot to begin with.
Yeah, that's a good point. Arash Madani, one of the most talented sports reporters that I've ever listened to, and he just proved it in this last half hour. Thanks for joining us again on SportsCage. I think you're up tomorrow, I think so.
We'll do it again tomorrow.
We'll talk about maybe the Blue Jays. They appear to be better than people realize, but we'll find out.
They're hot.
Thanks. They're hot. Thanks for joining us.